SAGES Stories.
Welcome to today's episode of SAGES Stories, the official podcast of SAGES, the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. Please make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so you can stay up to date with our most recent episode and enjoy the show. Welcome, everyone. I'm sure many of you surgeon listeners are still reflecting back on our recent SAGES meeting in Denver last month in March. Well, that was a great one, as are all SAGES meetings, but frankly, Kevin, you probably thought I would freeze to death, huh?
You were going to freeze in there, Denver.
But you saw I was all bundled up. I was nice and warm. I was the only bundled up person at the meeting. Could you even see my eyes?
I could not see you.
Yeah, I had a shopping trip for a trip to Iceland. So I thought Iceland, Denver, similar to me. They're both very cold. All right. Well, we are now moving on to episode 8 of SAGES Stories. We're so excited to be dropping that, where we shine the light on some of SAGES' most impactful leaders. I am your co-host, Dr. Shirin Towfigh, tuning in from Los Angeles, California.
And I'm Dr. Kevin El Hayek, comfortably back home in Cleveland, Ohio.
Today's guest is another living legend of SAGES, Rick Greene. Dr. Greene is currently the medical director of the Cancer Data Registry at the Levine Cancer Institute in Charlotte, North Carolina. He received his medical school training at the University of Virginia, where he was elected to membership into AOA, which stands for Alpha Omega Alpha, and that's the National Honor Society for Medical Schools. He completed a residency in surgery at Yale University School of Medicine. He was on active duty with the United States Navy and was surgeon on the USS Nimitz. Dr. Greene is a surgeon with a clinical focus on surgical oncology and has been involved in organizational work pertaining to a cancer for a number of years. He was a founding member of SAGES, which is one of the many reasons I am super excited to have him on as a guest, and was even president from 1992 to 1993.
Among his many talents, and we're just going to touch on a few, he's been involved in many forms of media for various surgical societies. And as soon as you hear him speak, you'll know why. He was the host of The Recovery Room, which was an audio conversation sponsored by the American College of Surgeons from 2010 to 2016. In that show, he hosted experts in surgery, medicine, ethics, public health, and they discussed many of the latest developments in medicine and healthcare. Now he is the podcast for Speaking of Surgonc, which is sponsored by the Annals of Surgical Oncology and the Society of Surgical Oncology, where he discusses all things, hernia related? That's not right. That podcast is all about surgical oncology. I'm sorry. We were just in this pattern of having only inviting hernia surgeons onto the show.
You only wish, Kevin. All day hernias.
So Rick is, of course, the senior medical advisor and editor of General Surgery News, which is the #1 most widely read literature among surgeons nationwide. So not only do we have to look up to him on a clinical level, he is also a huge influence on us as we try to replicate the success he had as podcast host. I have had the opportunity to hear Rick on numerous occasions, both on the interviewing and interviewee end. We have some big shoes to fill, Shirin, to get to where Dr. Greene is. So welcome to SAGES Stories, Rick.
Shirin and Kevin, it's just an absolute pleasure to be with you. So I thank you for having me.
I'm a little bit in awe because our audience can't see, but I'm in my office with like a relatively kind of low tech microphone, and Rick has the full studio look. The stuff you see on TV, that's Rick right now. The headphones, the huge microphone hanging from a post, just like the sound room. So this is amazing. We could only hope to be that one day, Rick.
Yeah, well, you guys sound very, very good. So let me tell you.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. So, again, the intimidation factor is up there.
For sure. Well, thank you for your time. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show. I bumped into you at the last SAGES meeting, and you were so gracious to agree to come and be one of our early guests. Um, I don't know. I'm kind of really excited because I've been following you through SAGES since I was a resident, second year resident, and you've been a staple of every surgery meeting, every SAGES meeting. Um, and now you're like this amazing podcaster. So be gentle on us. We'll do our best. But carry on.
So the breadth of topics you've covered in your years in surgery in various media formats is huge. But for Sage's Stories, we try to really hone in on the subject, which in this case is you. It's clear you've had an amazing career, but it would be great for us to kind of hear, just about how your life progressed. So just tell us a little bit about your background. Where did you grow up? What was your surgical training like? And maybe some highlights of your surgical journey along the way.
Well, thank you again. I'm from Virginia. I grew up in a little town south of Richmond, Virginia, and went to public school and was lucky enough to have a wonderful university in my state, the University of Virginia. And I actually, when I was growing up, I had my first radio show when I was 14 years old.
Wow.
In the city that was adjacent to Colonial Heights, which was a little bigger, was called Petersburg. I had just a show. It was about my school, and I would highlight things that went on in the school. So that was the beginning of my career, my broadcasting career, and I've enjoyed it. And all through college, I had shows on the radio station at the University of Virginia, both in college and medical school, and and then went north for my surgical training. I think I decided I wanted to be a surgeon in around my third year medical school. I really wanted to be a pediatrician at first, but then
Wow.
sort of gravitated to surgery, and really loved it. I actually went to Yale to become a cardiac surgeon. And I had a wonderful mentor who interviewed me for that program. And when I matched there, I was delighted. But, as things happen, you two don't remember this, but in the waning years of Vietnam conflict, and again, we're talking in the early 70s, a medical student had to decide what branch of the service he or she wanted to go into. And then you were allowed to either have your first 2 years of surgical training without being called up, or they would decide to allow you to have your entire year, your entire 5 years or 6 years or 7 years,
Oh,
whatever it was. And for me, it was going to be 7 or 8 years.
Hmm.
So they finally notified me in the middle of my second year, my PGY 2 year, that I had to go in on active duty in the U.S. Navy after my second year. So, in those years, we had a pyramid program. We had 16 interns starting at Yale, and only 4 would graduate.
Oh, wow.
All of us were vying for the same 4 positions. So I walked into my chairman's office when I got this letter from the Navy and said, I'm sorry, but I got to go in the military, and I'm going to have to give up my position. And he said, well, I understand. So my plan was to go in the Navy. So about 3 months later, as luck would have it, I got a midnight missive, as my wife would say, from the Navy saying that really they had made a mistake and I could stay for my entire surgical training at Yale
interesting.
and then go into the military after that. Well, that was wonderful, but I had already given up my position and it had already been filled. So I walked into my chairman's office, who happened to be sort of a GI colorectal person. And I said, what can I do? I don't have a job. The Navy doesn't want me. He said, well, I know you're thinking of cardiac surgery, but I have a fellowship that we have from the American Cancer Society. So we're happy to give to you for a year. Now, if you want to accept this, you'll have to go to London and work in London for 6 months. at the St. Mark's Hospital, which is the National Colon and Rectal Hospital in the UK. So I said, doesn't sound bad. My wife's family was from London. And so we went over. Well, I tell you, that was a magnificent experience. I learned how to do colonoscopy. Now, remember, this was 1972.
Right.
And the colonoscope was just coming out. So I worked with a fellow named John Leonard Jones and Christopher Williams at St. Mark's, and they taught me how to do colonoscopy. I worked with a wonderful pathologist, and I got really involved in colon cancer and polyps and all sorts of stuff. And so I went back and I just decided that cardiac surgery was not for me. I wanted to spend my career not only in oncology, but also in some facet of GI. And actually, in 1972 and 73, as a third-year resident, working in the lab, remember, this was my PGY 3-year, I was the only one at Yale who knew how to do colonoscopy. And I was called upon to do the colonoscopies for
Including
people.
the faculty, I'm
There was no
presuming.
there were no
Yeah.
faculty, no GI people had trained in colonoscopy at that point. So that was an interesting experience. And of course, as time wore on, I got more involved in oncology and stayed, of course, was able to get my oncology training there as well, and then went into the Navy and was assigned on the USS Nimitz, which at that point was the prototype of a nuclear aircraft carrier. So I was the only surgeon for 6,000 men on that ship. It was a wonderful experience. And, I could talk for hours about the different things that occurred on that ship, but I operated a lot. Actually, there's a movie that you probably should look at. It's called The Final Countdown, if you've never seen it. It's on Netflix. It's about a nuclear aircraft carrier that happens to be in the Pacific, and they get into a terrible storm and go through a time warp. And the time warp takes them back to December 6, 1941. And so you can imagine, they know what's going to happen the next day. Well, the point I'm making is I had the speaking role in that movie of the ship's physician offered to me. Now, in that movie,
That's cool. All right, we'll watch it. Now we'll watch it just for that.
Well, hang on for a minute. In that movie was Kirk Douglas, Martin Sheen, James Farentino, and several others who you may or may not know. But the point is,
Right.
as you know, many movies, they're slated to start at a specific time, but unfortunately get backed into the future. And what happened is they delayed starting that movie. They filmed it on the Nimitz, but I was already had my next assignment to the Portsmouth Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia. So unfortunately, I had to give up my position as the speaking role for the ship's doctor.
Oh,
and
no.
So you won't see me in the movie, but
Oh, no.
you ought to look at the movie because it'll
Okay.
show you exactly what's on a nuclear carrier, because it was made on the Nimitz.
Wow.
So again, that
Okay.
was my Navy experience.
That's a great story. I always tell my students that whatever you plan on doing, you'll be surprised how life will change things. Pediatrics for you, and then cardiac surgery and surgical oncology, being on a movie. That's pretty amazing. Pretty amazing. Did you have any idea that you would have these changes in decisions for your career, or kind of interesting experiences, or they all kind of fell into your lap and you rolled with it?
Well, I think they sort of fall into your lap. I think many of the things in my life, I've been either in the right place at the right time. But, there's a Yiddish term, it's called beschert, and things are beschert. They're meant to be. And so, I wasn't meant to be a cardiac surgeon. Now, I will tell you that what I wanted to do after I finished my general surgery training, I wanted to go into pediatric surgery. But my wife thought I'd been in school for long enough. And she said, you probably don't want to do that. You might want to, start your career. Yeah, get a real job.
Yeah.
But I loved pediatric surgery, and I still do. But things happen for a reason. And so after I finished the Navy, I wanted to go into academics, but I wrote letters to every possible medical school you can think of, and saying that I felt I was fairly well trained. I had a real interest in working with residents. I got one interview, and I won't tell you where it was, but it was a new medical school that was just opening. And it was in a place, and my wife said, you really should go look at it. But if you take the job, I will not be going with you.
Oh my Lord.
And so,
Be a lonely
I
job.
I thought that was a signal, and decided that, well, I decided to go into practice, and I went into practice in a small town in Maryland. And this is another thing that just fell in, because the man who ran this practice, it was in Havre Grace, Maryland, 30, 40 miles above Baltimore. He was a man I had met at summer camp. He was the camp surgeon at summer camp that I went to for years in Maryland. And, I knew him. And so I contacted him. We had kept in contact over the years. And he said, please, why don't you come into practice with me? So I did. And I really enjoyed it. It was a small community hospital. I did the vascular surgery. I did general surgery. I did all sorts of things. And I did endoscopy. And, he even bought a colonoscope for me. But I found out what the politics of medicine was like in a community, and not even a small community, a large community, because when I started scheduling patients to do colonoscopy in a little office setting that he had on our second floor, the GI people came to him and said, if I do the colonoscopy, they will never get another referral to our practice. And so I'm laying the groundwork, you see, for my involvement in getting involved in SAGES in the beginning, because that was really sort of a lesson to me. And because surgeons weren't doing endoscopy. And remember, we weren't doing laparoscopy or anything else. Although I will tell you, I did some laparoscopy as a resident. But basically that we were just getting involved in flexible endoscopy. And so this was 1978 when I went to this little practice. But I stayed there for 2 years because I really wanted to get back to teaching. I wanted to get back to working with residents. I wanted to get back to being involved in research and some of the things that I was doing. And so one day I was reading the New England Journal of Medicine, which I, by the way, started reading when I was a medical student. And, they had an area in the back where they had job offerings. And
Right.
so one of those jobs was from a new medical school in South Carolina that was opening. And they were looking to have a chief of surgery at the VA hospital. And the whole medical school was built around the VA. That was one of the major hospitals for this new
Yeah.
medical school.
Great.
So anyway, yeah. So I applied. 4 months, never heard a thing. So I'm sitting in my office one day, and I get a call from my assistant, says so-and-so's on the phone. And this was the chairman of surgery, who said, why don't you come on down, look at the position? And so I did. And, I was there for 17 years. We built a surgical oncology division, and I was chief of surgery at the VA for that time. So, again, things happen for a reason. And that's how I got back to academics.
Yeah, that's the whole Malcolm Gladwell, you gotta be in the right place at the right time often, and then take advantage of that opportunity. So that's a lot of interest in medicine early on. Did you come from a family of doctors or have any experience with that early in your childhood?
Well, my father was in the retail jewelry business. The only
Okay.
person that was in medicine was an uncle of mine. He lived in New Jersey. He was my mother's brother, and he had his office in the house. He was a general physician, general
Mhm.
practice. And as a small child, I would go visit him, and it was the most miraculous thing. He had this beautiful paneled living room, but you opened the secret door from his living room, and you walked into his clinic. And I still remember the smells. And I was about 5 years old, and I decided at that time I wanted to be a doctor.
At 5 years old.
Right.
Wow.
And I wanted to cure cancer. I would tell people, I want to cure cancer.
Kevin was
I'm
still
gonna
getting
let my
potty trained.
5-year-old. Yeah, I'm gonna let my 5-year-old listen to this, and we'll see what happens. I don't have a feeling that he's got his mind made up that he wants wants to go into medicine at this point. So that's some clear insight that you had at a very young age.
Yeah, I might have gravitated to becoming a radio announcer, but I stuck with the medicine.
That's pretty amazing. So that's great. You had a role model in your uncle. And then along the way, who were the biggest influencers in your career?
Great question. Of course, you know, the people you train with are many of the people that you have as an influence. I think one of the people in medical school I met, I had the opportunity of having the opportunity to scrub with Denton Cooley when he
Oh
came to
wow,
our medical
wow,
school.
that's
And
amazing.
I was a third year resident, a third year medical student. And I scrubbed with him on a number of cases, and he was just a magician. Uh, and I think that's where I got my desire to go into cardiac surgery. And actually, I remained friends with Denton for many years because we both played the saxophone. Music was a big part of my life. I began playing the clarinet when I was about 6 years old, and I played all the woodwind instruments. And in college, I started the pep band at the University of Virginia. I had a rock and roll band in high school. I had a jazz band in
Oh,
college. And
I knew there
so,
was something special
this
about you.
all makes
I'm also a saxophone player myself. Well, I haven't played in a while, but yeah. So I knew there was something special about you. I was also a saxophone player.
but
Fun
it all
absolutely.
fact.
makes sense. It all makes sense now.
Yeah, but again, you know, the saxophone was one of the things that got me interested in Denton and some of the things that he was doing. Not only was a brilliant surgeon, of course, but anyway, and in my residency, there was a gentleman named Ira Goldenberg who unfortunately passed away many years ago, but he was developing a concept in 1970 when I started as a resident. It's a strange concept of just taking out the lump of a cancer in the breast. And he was vilified. People made jokes because, you know, we did radical mastectomies. That's all we did, radical mastectomies, no matter how big the cancer was. And so, but he and a radiation oncologist kept working on this. And of course, the story, the rest of the story is, and when I started in practice, I started doing lumpectomies and radiation because I felt this was the way things would go in the future. And he was a big influence in my life.
I mean, that kind of goes in line with this next question, which is that you were clearly in a lot of your early years a pioneer to introduce laparoscopy to the field of surgical oncology. I know that was definitely a tense moment, and there was a lot of skepticism around minimally invasive surgery and oncology. And I actually remember a surgical oncologist that I trained with. I told him I was going into MIS, and he said, "Oh yeah, I'm going to open up the center of MIS oncology. Only mine will be the center of maximally invasive surgical oncology." So, what was it like in those early days trying to merge laparoscopy and surgical oncology?
Well, as you know, I was around when SAGES started. I got a letter one day from Jerry Marks. He was thinking about putting a little group together because, he felt that surgeons should have an organization if they were interested in flexible endoscopy. And there were no other surgical organizations that wanted to take this on because of the concerns about the gastroenterologists and
Yeah, that was a big one.
how they would react, right? So I got involved in SAGES in 1980, 1981. We met and formed the organization. And of course, I was involved in all of the committees and everything. And finally, in 1992, I became president. And that was a very interesting time because, as you know, the first laparoscopic cholecystectomy was basically in 1989. And at that meeting in Louisville is where Jacques Parissot came and showed his video at our exhibit booth, one of the exhibit booths. And, so the rest was history. So by the time I took over as president, really that was the revolution was ongoing. And I was involved really in so many different things with newspapers and everything else, because not only were people doing the operation, but we were seeing the complications of the operation. And that was a problem.
Right.
And even New York State, they wanted to have a moratorium on all laparoscopic cholecystectomies. They wanted to shut it down. And so I was in a position to talk to all of these groups and talk to the National Institutes of Health and be involved in these conferences. And so it was really a very, very interesting time to be not only doing it, because I learned early. I did my first one in 1990 in Columbia, South Carolina, where I was living. And then, of course, taking on this responsibility as chair of president of SAGES was a really interesting time.
And how many of you were there in 1980?
There were about 20 of us
Oh, wow.
who met at the Peachtree Plaza Hotel in Atlanta. And again, the reason I was asked, for a number of years, I was having flexible endoscopy courses for surgeons. And I would have a course where 50 or 60 surgeons came, and I would have a laboratory for them. We had lectures. I was inviting people, specific friends of mine, to give talks, but it was only in flexible endoscopy, upper and lower. And so Jerry heard about this, and he said, would I be interested in joining with a group that might want to do this? And I said, of course, sign me up. And so we met and launched what was called SAGES. We looked at the logo. We talked about how to go about it. Of course, our first real SAGES meeting was not until 1987. It was in Williamsburg, Virginia. And so, then of course, sort of at mushroom. But by the time that I took over in 1992, that's when we really were in. And we wanted to embrace laparoscopy. We didn't want to just be, and we actually changed our name. It became the Society of American Gastrointestinal and Endoscopic Surgeons. That "and" was very important. It was debated a lot, but we added that "and" because we wanted to capture a lot of things.
Yes, I remember that part. Kevin doesn't remember. He was still getting potty trained in those years.
Yeah, well, what can I say?
That's right. Well, history is wonderful, and of course, it's been obviously such a wonderful thing to see what's happened to the organization, and like the two of you and all of the young people who have come in over the years. It's been wonderful to watch this.
So when you started SAGES, were you all young and early in your careers, or were there seasoned surgeons? I'm just curious at what stage in their career people decided to, start a brand new surgical society and focus on endoscopy.
Yes, well, I was 35 when I met with this group, and there were obviously a number of people older than I was, because remember, they wanted to have some seasoned people to make this more realistic and have people who were already recognized in the surgical world for some of the things that they were doing. But remember, there was such a limited number of surgeons who were doing flexible endoscopy at that time. And so there were not a big group. But, again, I was delighted being asked as a fairly young surgeon to be involved in this effort.
And with regard to that, do you feel that there is a change where gastroenterologists are okay having surgeons do colonoscopy, endoscopy? I feel that, even when I was a resident, that was a big deal. There was this kind of territory nationally where the GI doctors didn't like to see surgeons do it. I see more surgeons doing it. It's for sure part of our residency program training of residents now, where it wasn't before, thanks to SAGES and American Board of Surgery. But how much has that shifted? Is there still a territorial nature to endoscopy among surgeons versus non-surgeons?
Well, I think there'll always be sort of a turf issue when you think about GI and surgeons doing endoscopy. I will tell you, though, that now surgeons can get into the endoscopy suites that used to be run totally by GI people. I mean, this was an issue in many hospitals. That's why one of the things we tried to do early was develop guidelines for endoscopy that surgeons could do. How should you deal with your own medical staff? How do you deal with those issues in your own hospital? And then, of course, to do research, do some of the pilot studies we did showing that surgeons could do endoscopy as well, if not better, than many gastroenterologists because we knew the anatomy, tended to know the anatomy better. We could certainly take care of the complications that developed from flexible endoscopy. And so, yeah, I think it's been a major shift, of course, and I'm happy to see it because then what happened, you started to have faculty involved in surgery programs who were doing endoscopy and were training residents. And of course, this is something that I never had. I had to go away and as I said, learn it from somebody in another country. So, this was happening. Many young surgeons went to other places to learn endoscopy because a gastroenterologist would not teach endoscopy. They would not
Right.
get involved in a residency program.
Yeah.
This was anathema. And so I think a lot of that has changed now for the good.
In the midst of kind of this really, I would say, active period of endoscopy and laparoscopy and a lot of evolution in the field, you also continued to be involved with surgical media, and obviously we heard that that was a part of your, your high school education. But how did you loop that in, and what were some of those early, media, media opportunities that you took on, and how did that develop over the years?
Well, again, even as a teenager, I was interested in communication and how people communicated. I got involved in an oratorical contest that was sponsored by an organization, and went pretty far with that on a national level. And again, it was just speaking. It was public speaking. And I felt as my career went on and I got more involved in my residency and medical school, things like this, it's how we communicate with each other, how a physician communicates, certainly with a patient. And so, luckily, I getting behind a microphone never really unnerved me. And, being involved in radio and now the kinds of things we do, my wife has always said to me that I have a face that was made for radio. And so, you know, so it was a natural.
Nice.
And, and then of course it became part of what I did. Like, for instance, when we got involved in early on in laparoscopy, I was luckily enough I was involved with a small group that was invited to China in 1991 to introduce lap chole in China. They weren't doing it. There was no lap chole. We had to take our own instruments. And so all of the instrument makers and the companies went with us. And they finally decided, for instance, Ethicon decided that they should build a facility where people could be trained. And they decided they would build that facility in Cincinnati, Ohio. And in order to have the grand opening, they had a worldwide television conference. We didn't have Zooms at that time. And I was asked to be the MC of that worldwide program that opened the Ethicon facility in Cincinnati. And so, it was things like that. It was fun things to do because I really enjoyed it. And so a lot of what I've done, is from organizations that I've been involved in. And now, as you might know, I'm doing a fair number of podcasting for journals, for organizations. I've just launched another podcast this week that will highlight cancer registrars and cancer registries.
Nice.
They've never had a podcast before, so I've called it Cancer Registry World. And so, that's going to be on Apple Podcasts and all of the different podcast platforms that I use for my other podcasts.
Well, again, this brings up the intimidation factors. I know that. Have you had a chance to check out some of the Sages? So we put a lot of effort into the Sages Stories podcast. One of my closest friends gave us a solid B minus. What's your take?
Well, I've listened to all of the Sages stories. I
Oh,
think that I think they're marvelous. I've learned a lot from the people. Of course, I've worked with all these people. Uh, George Bursey has been a friend
yes.
and somebody I've been working with. We've collaborated on a number of things. As you may know, I just helped him with his autobiography last
Yes.
year. We brought that
Yeah,
out,
that was
and
great.
we've just
Great.
collaborated on a book on the history of laparoscopic biliary surgery.
We
That's
saw
just
the book.
No
We saw the
stones
book.
unturned. I
Yeah, we
no
saw
love
that
it.
book.
no stones unturned. That's right. And so, I mean, I love what you're doing. It's not only what people have done in their academic life, but who they are, how they got to where they are in their lives, and I just find it fascinating.
I think Kevin just needs a little bit extra, pat on the back because
Just fishing.
every
That was
week
my fishing moment. Yeah.
Kevin's fishing moment. I think Kevin we at least I somewhat relate to your comment, Rick, about having the perfect radio face. That may be why I got chosen. Why Kevin and
Oh,
I got
that's not
chosen for
true.
this
I
Wow.
podcast.
I doubt that.
I
I doubt that.
disagree on that,
I
on all
think
of us for that
it may
matter. I
be true.
disagree with your wife too, Rick. Yes.
I will tell her that.
All right. Well, yeah, the Bercy was definitely a great one because we got to do it at his home. And that was really quite a treat. And he's such a gracious host as well. And so he was a founder with you, is that right?
Well,
Or did he come
actually,
shortly afterwards?
yeah, despite the fact that George is going to be 101, he was not one of the founders.
Yeah, he said that.
He clearly has done so much from his development of technology, but interestingly enough, he was not in that cadre. I mean, obviously, he got involved because of his work, in endoscopy, and then of course in laparoscopy, and then became more involved because Barbara was there, and Barbara Salzman Bursey, and I remember the first time I recognized that they were an item. We were in Berlin, all together in Berlin in 1988 for the first World Congress in endoscopy, and we were launching the new journal, the journal Surgical Endoscopy. It was launched out of the papers at that meeting, and I mean, Barbara was there, and George was there, and Jerry Marks, and we were all hanging out together, and we knew something was going on between them. We couldn't quite figure it out, but as the history showed, that was a major get together. And so again, George, obviously, he actually followed me as president. So George was president in 1993-94, and I had the pleasure of welcoming him to the podium. So it's been wonderful to listen to all of the people that you've been talking about.
That's great. We got some guest on guest dirt. I love it.
Oh, absolutely. I get other stories for you, but I don't.
Well, that's why you're here, Rick. Keep them rolling.
Well, I mean, it's one of my really fun things that I've been doing. We developed this little group, the Lap Rappers,
Yeah.
and we
Wow.
we we
Yeah.
we launched in 1992-93, and you two, of course, I don't. You probably weren't. Well, I
Well,
don't know you.
Archana really likes the lap rappers. She's a big
My
fan.
favorite.
Yeah. Well, we were up against a group at that meeting in Washington called the Capitol Steps. Now, maybe you have heard of the Capitol Steps. And unfortunately, over the last couple of months, the Capitol Steps have decided to disband because of all of the political upheavals going on in the world. You can't sort of make fun of politicians anymore.
Mhm.
And so, but they performed at the SAGES meeting in 1992 in Washington, and we had our first program using the lap wrapper. So, I started doing the MC of the sing-off. And so I've been doing that for 25 years. We've been having, as you know, the sing-off at SAGES. So it's been a lot of fun. And again, that's part of sort of the communication shtick that I enjoy.
Well, that's really one of the major segments of our show, which is we have an actual We Are the Sages segment.
We are the world. We are the sages. We are the sages. Sing it, everybody. We are the ones who make it bright our day. So let's start treating.
I'm most excited about this. I think Archana's most excited about it. I feel that among all the members of SAGES, you are the most recognizable at the sing-off and therefore at SAGES. You're so animated and very involved. And if only we had a PowerPoint presentation of all your costumes and all the lyrics, that would have been fantastic. But in this We Are the SAGES segment, perhaps you can share some of your fun, memorable moments and stories, and any dirt you've got. We'll take any of it.
Well, I mean, of course, one of the things is really a delight in how many venues we've had the sing-off perform in. I mean, we've been, at Universal Studios in Los Angeles. We've been at Disney World. We've been at so many different venues that it's been delightful to really see the performance on that. And of course, when our Japanese colleagues became involved, it was another whole level of entertainment. The only thing we had to make sure of is that they weren't totally nude on the stage. We do have some decorum at SAGES.
We are doctors.
Yes, and so, but it's they really do it up nicely. And so then, of course, We Are the Sages came to be, and it's SAGES is such a unique organization. It really is a family, and people have brought their children. When I was president, my presidential year was in Phoenix, Scottsdale. And it was sort of interesting. One of our members actually got married at the SAGES meeting. The ceremony was during the SAGES meeting.
That's a SAGES story.
Wow.
And
what was that? I would like to give him a big shout out.
Well, his name was Jonathan Sakier, and he was married during the SAGES meeting.
Wow.
And they decided that they were going to have sort of a bachelor's party for him. Well, the bachelor's party, it was decided without my knowledge, was going to be in my suite at the hotel. As you know, the president has sort of a bigger hotel room, and they give you a suite.
We didn't know that, but thanks for sharing.
Well, there were some interesting
presidential cocktails.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, at the SAGES meeting, you have a little something at night for the president and the president's suite. Well, they decided they were going to invite several strippers to this bachelor's party. Now, I don't know how much you want to hear about this.
Keep going.
Yeah. So my wife and my children were staying in the suite with me. And you can imagine when all of this took place, I had a lot of explaining to do because I didn't arrange any of this, but it was hard to convince my wife that I did not arrange this. So that was an interesting time. Of course, that was the meeting that I rode in on a bull. You might have seen pictures of that in some of the SAGES brochures. Yeah, they had a live bull. I rode into the restaurant where the VIP dinner was being staged, and that was interesting in itself. And so, a lot of interesting things have gone on at the SAGES meeting, but I think those are highlights for me.
Okay. Well, on that note, I want to give you a little time to tell us about your family. It's not, your wife has popped in and out of a couple of these things, and I certainly want to let you get some airtime to highlight them. And as you mentioned, SAGES is often includes families, and I think that makes up a big part of who we are.
Well, yeah, I mean, I have my wife is Donna, and I have two wonderful children and now three grandchildren. Um, and they never really followed me in medicine, although my daughter is a psychotherapist, and I think she's as close as probably any of my children have been. But my son's an attorney, and um, they've been incredibly supportive. And it's just like everybody says, you can't do what you do without having your family supportive. Many times I was away for extended times. I used to do a lot of European travel in some of the things I was doing, especially when laparoscopic cholecystectomy first hit. So it's just been a joy, and to do that. Anytime you're a surgeon, of course, you're away from your spouse, you're away from your family, and then you take on these other responsibilities. But I wouldn't do it any differently. I have enjoyed everything that I've done. I look forward to a few other things, hopefully, in the future. But the family is so important. I got married the day before my internship started.
Oh,
My honeymoon was on Route 95 to New Haven, Connecticut, from Richmond, Virginia. You can imagine what that was like.
very romantic.
Yeah, and then I was on every other night, beginning right after we got to New Haven. So my wife was teaching; she's a teacher, and so I was working, and we finally got a honeymoon about a year and a half later. But that was, and we've been married 52 years, and so that was,
Congrats. That's awesome.
it was an interesting beginning, but I think it turned out well.
These are great stories. Rick, I'm sure the audience will get a feel for what we all know, which is you're such a special, unique person, fun, great radio voice for sure. But I feel that your personality, now that I know more about your story, your personality and your attitude toward life is part of how SAGES has evolved. It definitely has that family flair. It's also super fun. We joke about ourselves and we have lots of fun. The sing off, I'm not clear who actually started the sing off, but I have a feeling that you had a big part to do with it. Is that true?
Well, it was the Lap Rappers, the group
The
we
Lap
put
Rappers.
together. That was the
That was the
sing-off
beginning.
for
Oh,
a
that
couple
was
of
the
years.
singing.
Then we decided, well, we should really open this up. There were other people who wanted to do little acts. Then we sort of made it a talent show, and so that's how it started. But it was basically a core group of about 6 or 7 surgeons who, for the first few years, that was the sing-off.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons I was so excited to have you on as a guest. You were among the top on our list because this is exactly why you embody everything that SAGES is, but I think it's because you embodied it that SAGES is where it is. So I just want to really thank you for your time and agreeing to come on. And so privileged to have you on. Your stories have been great. And thank you so much for being our guest.
Well, I want to thank you. I think you're doing such a wonderful thing for SAGES, to memorialize the history and to have people on who were there at the beginning. I just want to congratulate both of you for what you're doing.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you, Rick. Appreciate it.
And that wraps up today's episode of SAGES Stories. You can view the show notes for additional information mentioned on the show. Also, please visit sages.org for membership information and for the most recent news from our society. Follow us on Twitter at @SAGES_updates. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss any new episodes. Tune in again next time, and remember, you can't spell minimally invasive surgery without SAGES.